X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
And welcome back to the X Zone, everyone. I am Rob McConnell. We're coming to you live and around the world from our broadcast center in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide toll-free 800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X Zone Radio TV. And our radio website where you can listen to the X Zone 7/24/365, as well as the live show Monday through Friday from 8 p.m. until midnight at www.xzoneradiotv.com. X Zone Nation, this hour, I've decided that it's going to be my hour. No guest, just you and I. Well, not really just you and I. I'm going to be playing an audio clip that was sent to me today, which inspired me to do this hour with you. Now, as you know, we've had Paul Hellyer, the former defense minister and deputy prime minister of Canada, on the show a couple of times. We've also met Paul at the Alien Cosmic Expo in Brantford over the weekend, yeah, I wish, during the summertime. And this person sent me this clip, and they also sent me a newspaper article because, well, it raises a lot of questions as to the credibility of someone who was in such an important position as Minister of Defense for Canada, as well as being the Deputy Prime Minister. The article is originally from Britain. It's the Online Mail, and this goes back to the 22nd of April of this year. The headline is, "Governments are hiding aliens, claim former Defense Minister Paul Hellyer urges world leaders to reveal secret files." A former defense minister has accused world leaders of concealing the presence of aliens. No, we're not talking about the Mexicans that keep running into the United States, gang. We're talking about the ones from outer space, apparently. Paul Hellyer, who was Canadian minister from 1963 to 1967, is now urging powers to release what he believes to be hidden data on UFOs. Now, this is a quote. "Much of the media won't touch the documents," he said during a keynote speech at the Disclosure Canada tour at the University of Calgary. "You just have to keep working away and hope that someday you'll get a critical mass," he has said, and this is according to a CTV report. "The public will say in one way or another, 'Mr. President' or 'Mr. Prime Minister, we want the truth, and we want it now because it affects our lives." Hellyer, who is 91, first went public with his beliefs of aliens on Earth in 2005, becoming the first high-ranking politician to do so. Now, he claims that aliens have been visiting our planet for thousands of years and are unimpressed on how we live. Now, I've only been here a sandstone of that, and I'm not impressed with the way that we live on this planet. Oh, okay, let's go back to the article, Craig. You're right. This is a quote. "We spend too much time fighting each other. We spend too much money on military expenditures and not enough on feeding the poor and looking after the homeless and the sick," he said. Now, let me just stop there. I've been doing this show for 25 years, and I've been saying that from day one. Mr. Hellyer, you're behind the times. Last year, the former defense minister declared on Russian TV, now, I'm going to repeat that for you. Last year, the former Canadian defense minister declared on Russian TV that aliens are walking among us. But he said they are refusing to share their advanced technologies until we change our polluting and warring ways. He told Russian Today's TV program, Sofiko, that there are 80 different species of extraterrestrials, some of whom look just like us, and they could walk down the street and you would not know that you've walked past one. Now, in the bizarre interview, Hellyer made a series of pronouncements about aliens which grew increasingly outlandish and sounded closer to the plot of a Star Trek movie. Let me see here. We have a long history of UFOs, and of course there has been a lot more activity in the last few decades since we've invented the atomic bomb, he said. They are very concerned about that and that we might use it again because of the whole cosmos as a unity, and it affects not just us but other people in the cosmos. They are very much afraid that we might be stupid enough to start using atomic weapons again. Hey, he's a prophet. How did he know that North Korea was going to detonate a hydrogen bomb yesterday? I've got to start rethinking this guy. However, Hellyer told Sophie Coe that most of the aliens want to help rather than destroy us. Let me see, this is a quote. I would say that nearly all are benign and benevolent, and they do not want to help us. There may be one or two species which do. Hellyer believes aliens are responsible for some of our modern technology, including the microchip, LED light, and Kevlar vest, he said. This is the part that got me, the Kevlar vest, and I'll tell you why in a few moments. He said he has never met an alien, but has seen a UFO near his cabin in Ontario's Lake Muskoka. Hellyer described several types of aliens, including tall whites who are working with the U.S. Air Force in Nevada. Now, that he could have only gotten from Charles Hall. And Charles Hall has no physical evidence or proof of this really happening. But, Charles has been milking this story ever since, well, I've been doing this show 25 years, and, this is what he was doing way back then. Listen, I had the opportunity of meeting Charles Hall in Las Vegas. He's a nice guy. He really is a nice guy. But anyway, this is another quote. They're able to get away with that. They had a couple of their ladies dressed up and go out as none into Las Vegas to shop, and they weren't detected, he claimed. That is a direct quote from Charles Hall because I remember him telling me that here on the show. Another group of aliens are called short grays, who have very slim arms and legs and are about 5 feet high with large heads. Sounds like a couple of Asians I know. A third group is called Nordic Blondes, and Hellyer said that if you met one, you'd probably say, I wonder if she's from Denmark or somewhere else. That's the end of the article. But here's what gets me. Here are some of Paul Hellyer's more outlandish claims on aliens. Now, this is from the same article. Most aliens come from other solar systems, star systems, although there are some living on Venus, Mars, and Saturn's moon. Next, there have been 4 species of aliens visiting our planet for thousands of years. Next, there are between 2 and 12 total species of aliens, although some place the number closer to 80. Here we go again. Next one, some look just like humans, while others appear to be more like the creatures portrayed in popular culture. Next, most aliens have benevolent intentions towards humanity, although a handful have ulterior motives. Next, the alien species known as the tall whites are working with the United States Air Force in Nevada and have been known to pass for humans in public. Next, the Federation of Alien Species has vowed not to intervene in human affairs unless they are invited to. Next, the Federation is very disappointed in the way humans have treated the planet. Next, and finally, alien technology is far more advanced but has given us LED lights, microchips, and Kevlar vests. Well, this is where I was able to say, Mr. Hellyer, you are full of hot air. No disrespect meant to the former Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, but sir, you are full of hot air. And you know what, Exo Nation? I know what I'm talking about sometimes. I'll be the first to admit that. But when it comes to Kevlar, this is why I know he's full of hot air. Because a U.S. patent number 4780351, and here's the abstract. A device for containing the force of an explosion comprises a blanket or curtain of flexible material that can be dragged around a danger zone. The blanket or curtain comprises a plurality of layers of fabric, each layer having a tight, balanced weave independently woven from a tough, non-combustible yarn of at least 1,000 denier. The fabric is subsequently interrupted by stitching in a central zone intended to take the main force of the explosion. The fabrics are bound together at their edge with a border of tough material extending around the periphery of the blanket or curtain. Now you're saying, so Rob, what the hell does that have to do? Well, that's the premise behind Kevlar, a bulletproof vest. How I know that this is more than just fiction is because the patent was filed August the 20th, 1987. The date the patent was granted, October the 25th, 1988. The assignee was Wheelabrator Corporation of Canada Limited in Cambridge, Ontario. And here's the kicker, Exo Nation. The inventor, Joseph Chimpoyish, my uncle. Now, my uncle, God rest his soul, passed away last year. About this time last year. He was my godfather. He was an ex-police officer. He worked at United Aircraft. He moved to Ontario with his family. And he remained my favorite uncle because he was my godfather. My mother's brother. I know for a fact that my Uncle Joe, God rest his soul, was no alien. But I also know for a fact that my Uncle Joe was the inventor and the patent holder of U.S. Patent 478035. Bet you didn't see that one coming, did you, Paul Hellyer? I don't think you did. Exo Nation, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to play that audio that was sent to me earlier today that got me really thinking about Mr. Hellyer and my interviews with him and who the man behind the scene is and why he went from Minister of Defense, defending a country, being the Deputy Prime Minister, and after a number of years, it seems that he's, well, this is just what I see. You know, he's trying to say and do things that are totally out of character for a person who held such a high office. Sensationalism sells, I guess. Anyway, here we go. Paul Hellyer in a clip called Full Disclosure. This you have to hear, and I'd love you to send me your comments, xzone at xzoneradiotv.com. Here we go.
My name is Paul Hellyer, and I am a former Minister of National Defence for Canada. This disturbing message is for the several million Americans and others who were kind enough to listen to the 22-minute presentation at the Citizens Disclosure hearing in Washington in May 2013, and for anyone else who cares deeply about the future of their country and the planet Earth. The U.S. is in grave danger. Strangely, the peril is not from foreign enemies, but from enemies within. So I beg you to listen to a summary of the major problems, followed by some suggestions as to how the U.S. might be recaptured by loyal Americans, to the enormous relief of friends who have been watching helplessly from the sidelines. The stakes couldn't be higher. So I spent the 15 months following the Washington hearing feverishly writing a new book, incorporating what I think every American has the right to know and must know to end the incredible naivety observed at the citizens' hearing. The name of the book is The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis. Most of my friends, both American and Canadian, tend to agree that the world is in a state of crisis. But very few are aware that the problems are not natural phenomena. They have been engineered by a very tiny elite group of rich, ruthless, and power-hungry people who have been deliberately keeping the majority of decent, hard-working taxpayers totally in the dark. The iron veil of secrecy is now nearing the end of its 7th decade. When World War II ended, little attention was given to Operation Paperclip, under which hundreds of Nazi scientists were brought to the U.S., given new identities, and then appointed to important jobs in the military and elsewhere. Some of them would have been aware of UFOs and the ET presence from their experience in working with them in the 1930s. The American military began to take the subject more seriously after retrieving one of the vehicles that crashed near Roswell, New Mexico, on July 4th, 1947, and decided to back-engineer its technology, which was light years more advanced than anything that we had known. On Tuesday, July the 8th, 1947, at 11 a.m. Mountain Time, Roswell Airfield Commanding Officer Colonel William Blanchard announced in a press release the recovery of a flying disc. That was the truth. Later that same day, at approximately 4:30 p.m. Central Time, Brigadier General Roger Ramey, commander of the 8th Air Force and Blanchard's supervising officer, presented to the press an alternative story. He claimed the Army had recovered a Rowan target device suspended by a neoprene balloon. That was a lie. In fact, it was the cornerstone lie of what was to become a cult of lying and disinformation that is still United States policy today, 68 years later. In my brief address to the Citizens Disclosure hearing, I said that the United States and much of the Western world is ultimately controlled by an unelected, unaccountable cabal. Its apex is the banking and financial cartel, followed by the oil cartel, the CEOs of the largest and most powerful transnational corporations, major intelligence agencies, including the CIA, the FBI, and the NSA, and a major slice of the U.S. military. Their collective power and influence is incalculable, and it is their plan for the U.S. and the rest of us that is so alarming. Their plan is an empire greater in size and power than any empire before it. They call this the New World Order, which, ironically, is the same name Hitler used for the smaller empire he imagined. One sure thing, the New World Order will end all pretense of government of, by, and for the people. It will be a dictatorship of, by, and for a small minority of the rich and privileged elite. Much of its power lies in the privately owned banking system. Why monarchs and politicians allowed a private cartel to become the monopoly supplier of new money, we will never know. But this power is almost absolute and can determine the fate of nations and their people. A system where nearly all money is created as debt and debt that has to be repaid with interest, but where no one creates any money with which to pay the interest, is a dead end that leaves debtors with no alternative but to borrow the money to pay the interest and go deeper and deeper into debt. It's so wildly absurd that a grade 10 student would only need a few minutes to recognize it as one giant Ponzi scheme. Banks can invest $5 million and leverage it to create $100 million in loans that have to be repaid with interest. In effect, they skim 95% off the top of every loan. That is the reason I call them the money mafia. Monetary reform is the most urgent of all essential reforms, and my book contains a specific formula that the brave Occupy Wall Street protesters could have used to advantage when asked, "But what do you suggest?" What they lacked was the answer to that question. If about 99% of the population don't understand a deception that has been responsible for the Great Depression of the 1930s, the terrible recessions of 1981-82, 1991, and the Great Recession of the 21st century, it's not too difficult to understand why there are so many skeptics about UFOs and their occupants, even though several species have been visiting planet Earth for thousands of years. The crashes near Roswell, New Mexico, that I referred to earlier, were, in a sense, watershed events. In Canada, Wilbert Smith, a senior officer in our Federal Department of Transport, of which I later became minister, wrote a top-secret memorandum to his boss based on information he had received during a visit to our embassy in Washington. The memo, dated November 21st, 1950, read in part as follows. A. The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States, rating higher even than the H-bomb. B. Flying saucers exist. C. Their modus operandi is unknown, but concentrated effort is being made by a small group headed by Dr. Vannevar Bush. D. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. A control group of 12 senior civilian scientists and military officers was established by President Truman. They were known as the Majestic 12, or MJ-12, which issued a memorandum that included how to respond to UFO sightings by saying that they were natural phenomena, such as plasma or swamp gas, or that the observer might have been imbibing too much Jack Daniels bourbon. Nothing could be further from the truth. Under the Eisenhower administration, much of the physical engineering was transferred to underground facilities in Nevada and Arizona. Meanwhile, much of the control was transferred to civilian agencies in order to create plausible deniability as to its existence. When President Eisenhower wanted to take a look at the restricted areas, he was denied access. It was only when he threatened to send in the First Army that it was agreed that he could send 3 confidants to look at the secret areas 51 and S4. They reported that the Roswell vehicle was indeed being back-engineered by United States forces. President Eisenhower was so distressed by the situation that he included in his farewell address to the nation that his fellow Americans should beware of the military-industrial complex, which, according to one witness, was his way of saying that the ET file had fallen into the wrong hands. Indeed it had. It was under the control of the military-industrial complex, otherwise known as the financial intelligence, and military wing of the all-pervasive cabal, which has seized control of the United States and much of the balance of the world. Beginning with Eisenhower, not one of the presidents of the United States has been given completely honest advice by his civil, military, and intelligence advisors, nor fully briefed on the ET presence and technology. The military-industrial complex adopted a strategy of perpetual warfare to enhance its own power and profit. It is inconceivable that this plan was discussed and approved in advance by any American president. Wernher von Braun, the German rocket scientist who came to the U.S. at the end of World War II, told my friend Dr. Carol Rosen, who worked with him, that they, the military-industrial complex, in order to maintain perpetual war, had to have an enemy. First, it will be the communists, he said. Then it will be the terrorists. And finally, it will be the ETs. So far, the plan has been unfolding exactly as forecast. The cabal, sometimes referred to as the shadow government, has been in control. When Sarah McClendon, veteran White House reporter, asked President Bill Clinton why he didn't do something about UFO disclosure, Clinton replied, and I quote, "Sarah, there's a government inside the government, and I don't control it." End of quote. Imagine the President of the United States and Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces isn't cleared to know what his troops are doing. Well, with the end of the Cold War, the Pentagon wrote a new defense plan, popularly known as a project for the new American century. It was very far-reaching and involved conquest of much of the world by financial or military means, whichever was easiest. The document, which very few people were aware of, admitted that it was so far-reaching that it might be too much for Americans to swallow in the absence of some catastrophic and catalyzing event like a new Pearl Harbor. Well, Lady Luck appeared to be on their side in the form of September the 11th, 2001. Amateur foreign pilots trained in the U.S. allegedly hijacked planes and flew them into the sides of the World Trade Towers 1 and 2, and then into the Pentagon. Later in the day, the buildings collapsed. President Bush declared war on the terrorists and invoked the provisions in the North Atlantic Treaty under which an attack on any one country is considered to be an attack on all. The reaction was unprecedented since the outbreak of World War II and the later attack on Pearl Harbor. The English-speaking world, in particular, was incensed, and a high percentage of Americans were prepared to nuke the perpetrators. Defense Secretary Donald Rumsfeld soon announced that, quote, that means war against Iraq, end of quote, even though there was absolutely no evidence of Iraqi complicity, none whatsoever. Although most Muslims had been sympathetic to the U.S. in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, as soon as the bombs started dropping on Baghdad, moderate Muslims by the thousand were so outraged and overcome by hate that they opted for a terrorist response. From that day on, it would be difficult to find a terrorist who did not have "Made in the USA" etched on his or her soul. Now, more than a decade later, the situation becomes even darker as the truth about 9/11 begins to emerge from the burial ground of a controlled press. We find that high officials in the George W. Bush administration knew of the attack weeks in advance and made no effort to prevent it, On the contrary, the evidence points to complicity when we find that not just 2, nor 3 buildings collapsed, nor 4, nor 5, nor 6, but 7. Some, if not all, had been rigged for controlled demolition. But that isn't all. A new weapon of mass destruction was used that reduced the concrete and steel to dust before it reached the ground. If you have any doubts about this, get a copy of Dr. Judy Wood's book entitled, Where Did the Towers Go? 500 pages of meticulous evidence. The unfolding story reveals the greatest mass deception in history, with the most universally negative consequences. Far more important than the long lineups for security checks at airports. We have been stripped of our civil rights one by one, including, I regret to say, habeas corpus, reversing 800 years of progress. Country was set against country, religion against religion. Words like peace and negotiated settlement, which had been possibilities before 9/11, were lost in the jungle of lies. The cabal, also known as the military-industrial complex, was not interested in a just settlement. It wanted perpetual war, and that was what its heinous deception achieved. It also robbed the once great United States of America of its last vestige of moral leadership. Worse, by invoking NATO, it transformed a defense alliance into a U.S.-led task force. And by recruiting former countries from the Soviet Union, an obvious provocation to Russia, it has managed to create rumblings of a new Cold War. The danger lies in the fact that the New World Order is not limited to old boundaries and concepts of empire, and we seem hell-bent toward a third world war. Horrible beyond human imagination. It must not be allowed to happen. Almost every president since Eisenhower has been under the control of the cabal, and President Obama, regrettably, has been no exception. Before he was sworn in as a new president, I saw a picture of his economic advisors, and I said, uh-oh, the same old gang who permitted the Bush recession. Nothing will change. Then when the president persuaded innocent allies to join in a second unwinnable war in Iraq, and a senior U.S. military commander confirmed that it would take several years to win, it was obvious that President Obama was playing the military-industrial alliance game, and that it would be the only winner. Extreme Islam is an ideology, and it can't be killed by smart bombs. Most ISIS recruits begin as young idealists who are repelled by the way the world is being run and are looking for a better way. Any effective strategy must be to win their hearts and minds and not just to kill them and make them martyrs to a cause. Step number 1 is to convince President Obama that the policies of his predecessor benefit no one but the arms manufacturers. So all non-Muslim members of the coalition should withdraw from the war against the Islamic State and begin to reverse all of the wrongs committed by the West in recent years. Hate him or love him, President Obama is the only person in the world with the power to lead a penitent United States and its misled allies in the moral and spiritual revolution essential for a world of peace and justice, where the human species has a fighting chance to survive. The transformation has to be reversible before the next U.S. presidential election, which could be the point of no return. Ultimately, the Muslims must be allowed to settle their own problems. Before 9/11, Iraq was a Sunni dictatorship that treated its Shia brothers and sisters badly. The U.S. deposed Saddam Hussein and established a new Shia majority that treated its Sunni minority unfairly. The seeds of further conflict were born. The Muslims must resolve their age-long differences as Christians and of different denominations have recently been able to do. Perhaps the United Nations might be invited by the Muslims to convene a meeting of both temporal and religious leaders in search of a better way of settling grievances and differences. Meanwhile, it's time that all the Abrahamic religions, Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, kissed and made up. I was in my 80s before I knew that Allah was my God. My guess is that the majority of Christians are equally ill-informed. And the Israelites should start treating Palestinians as the blood brothers that they really are, instead of as inferior beings. It is wise to remember that the original covenant with the Creator applied to all of Abraham's children, and not just to the favored few. The bottom line is that the use of drones, suicide bombs, and crushing military superiority on the part of Christians, Muslims, and Jews are all prohibited by their holy books. The next step is to persuade all the major religions to practice the one principle that they have in common, which is to treat others the way they would want to be treated if the roles were reversed. Universal practice of the Golden Rule would transform the world. I get hundreds of emails from decent Americans and like-minded individuals in a dozen countries who want nothing more than the end of militarism and a massive shift in priorities toward universal peace and justice. Quite a few are involved in small projects that are making a significant difference at the micro level. But most of them are realists and recognize that the cabal doesn't want peace and justice. It wants power, wealth, and empire. So what can an individual do in the face of unprecedented power and wealth? The cabal, headed by the banking cartel, has almost unlimited financial power. But we, the people, have the numbers and must combine our limited power to form a critical mass that can move mountains. There is no guaranteed formula, but an educated guess would be that if 5 million decent and determined Americans got a copy of The Money Mafia, A World in Crisis, read it carefully, and then actively supported the comprehensive action plan set out in it, a miracle could happen. Each one of the 5 million would have to write a personal letter to the president, their senator, and their congressperson, demanding action forthwith in each of the critical areas in the same spirit of bipartisanship that would be expected in a war to save the world, which is exactly what is at stake. I am not going to repeat the list of essential reforms here, except for a few key items. The U.S. should play a leadership role in ending the private bankers' monopoly to print money. Actually, it isn't really money, it's just credit created out of thin air, a computer entry, and restore some of the power to the people that is rightfully theirs. President Obama can mint $2 trillion platinum coins to get the ball rolling, while legislation is prepared to take over the Fed and establish a 100% publicly owned central bank, a central bank of the United States. There cannot and will not be peace and justice on earth while the Fed continues to exist. Speaking of justice, If President Obama really wants a place in history as a friend of the 99% rather than the 1%, he can fast-track the Trans-Pacific Partnership into oblivion. Even the name is a lie. There is no way it is a partnership. It should be called the Trans-Pacific Power Grab by a small elite group who want to feather their own nests at the expense of other people's rights to run their own affairs for their own benefit. So the choice is yours, Mr. President, to decide if it will be the people or the cabal. There must be full disclosure of what the cabal and the U.S. shadow government have been doing since World War II. To what extent has the extraterrestrial space and weapons technology been back-engineered? And is it true, as the late Ben Rich, former CEO of Lockheed's Skunk Works, said, and I quote, "We, the U.S., now have the technology to take E.T. home," end of quote. The extent to which there has been collaboration between the cabal and the ETs. What species? What motives? Were there agreements signed? And if so, were the terms of the treaty or treaties lived up to? To hear the truth emerge after so many years of continual lies and darkness will require either that the National Security Act of 1947 be rescinded or suspended, with a general amnesty so that decent Americans can tell the truth without fear of retribution. A kind of truth and reconciliation process will be required. Then there are the positive benefits that must be pursued. The President must issue an order that would release the secret patents on exotic energy and make them available to the world. The secret technology, in combination with the flexible financial system, will make it possible to convert from an oil economy to a clean economy in 7 years. It will provide billions of new jobs worldwide and help close the ever-widening gap between the haves and the have-nots. Simultaneously, a project should be started to restore our oceans before the food chain has been permanently broken. In addition, worldwide programs of forest preservation and reforestation should help provide the carbon sinks essential for greater stability in weather patterns. Speaking of changing weather patterns, full disclosure should give us a better idea of how much weather patterns have been altered by government tinkering. Due to restraints of time, space, and expertise, my book makes no mention of either chemtrails or the high-frequency active auroral research program known as HAARP. But from what I have heard and read from credible informants, I would say that they are Satan's illegitimate Siamese twins of death and destruction. If so, they should be terminated at once and relegated to the netherworld from which they came. And before the people of the world become aware and launch a $10 or $20 trillion class action suit against the United States Air Force, its contractors, associates, and suppliers. A visit to the battlefields of World Wars I and II in November of last year affected me profoundly. The slogans were everywhere. Never again. We had seen the horror of man's inhumanity to man, which was sordid beyond belief. Yet as I reflected on the real world of today, I thought that the millions who gave their lives had died in vain. Even before the Second World War was over, a group of greedy, self-centered men were plotting the next round, and they have been working assiduously at their plan. The same symptoms of mass unemployment, poverty, and seeking military advantage have been replicated. But the next time, we would start off with weapons of mass destruction just in their infancy then. the next time it is not just supremacy that is at stake, although there are some who think so. It is the survival of the human species that is at stake. God will not be mocked. We have been given the choice of making our planet uninhabitable, as we have been told some other species have done, or we can move in the opposite direction of peace, love, justice, and cooperation for the betterment of all, rich and poor alike. We have been given a few months, not years, to change course before it is too late. The choice is ours. We are the ones who are destined to write our own history.
There you go. That is called Full Disclosure by Paul Hellyer. And just before we go to our news break, on June the 3rd, 1967, Paul Hellyer flew in by helicopter to officially inaugurate an unidentified flying object landing pad in St. Paul, Alberta. The town was built. They built the landing pad as its Canadian Centennial Celebration project and as a symbol of keeping space free from human warfare. The sign beside the pad reads, "The area under the world's first UFO landing pad was designated international by the town of St. Paul as a symbol of our faith that mankind will maintain the outer universe free from national wars and strife, that future travel in space will be safe for all intergalactic beings, to all visitors from Earth or otherwise are welcome to this territory and to the town of St. Paul." In early September 2005, Hellyer made headlines by publicly announcing that he had believed in the existence of UFOs. On the 25th of September, he was invited to be a speaker at the Exopolitics Conference in Toronto, where he told an audience that he had seen a UFO one night with his late wife and some friends. He said that although he had discounted the experience at the time, he had kept an open mind to it. He said that he started taking the issue much more seriously after watching ABC's Peter Jennings' UFO special in February 2005. Here's my question, and I asked him that. But I'm going to put it out to you, ExoNation. He was the Minister of Defense. He was the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada. He had privy information to information that he was in the position and still is in the position today to say that as Minister of Defense for Canada, I know for a fact that there are UFOs. Because as Minister of Defense, I saw those reports. They came across my desk. My generals, my colonels, my majors, my staff were telling me about these UFOs over Canada. But he has never said that. Not once. Not once. But what he did say, and this is where we go back to what I was saying, that in early September 2005, he made headlines by publicly announcing that he believed in the existence of UFOs. But it was only after watching Peter Jennings' special in February 2005 that his interest was really piqued. And apparently after watching Jennings' UFO special, it prompted Hellyer to read U.S. Army Colonel Philip J. Corso's book, The Day After Roswell, which had been sitting on his shelf for some time. Hellyer told the Toronto audience that he spoke to a retired U.S. Air Force general who confirmed the accuracy of the information in the book. In November 2005, he accused President George Bush of plotting an intergalactic war. I'm not making this up. This is too weird, too strange, even for the X-Zone to make up. I'm going to say that again. In November 2005, Paul Hellyer the former defense minister, and the former deputy prime minister of Canada under the Liberal government, accused U.S. President George W. Bush of plotting an intergalactic war. Now, this is a quote. The United States military are preparing weapons which could be used against the aliens, and they could get us into a galactic war without us having any warning. The Bush administration has finally agreed to let the military build a forward base on the moon, which will put them in a better position to keep track of the going-ons and comings of the visitors from space and to shoot at them if they so decide. All right. No wonder people look at us funny up here in Canada. I wonder what Donald Trump or Mr. Cruz would say if they heard that the Liberal Minister of Defense and the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, not the sitting ones, but former, we're going around Canada and the United States saying that, Bush nearly started an intergalactic war. And you know what, guys? There's a forward base on the moon, and you guys, the Americans, have the ability to shoot down our space visitors if they decide. I'll be back on the other side of this commercial break with the news as we continue here in the X Zone from our broadcast center in good old Hamilton, Ontario, Canada. Worldwide toll-free, 1-800-610-7035. Email xzone@xzoneradiotv.com. On all social media sites, X-Zone Radio TV, and our website, www.xzoneradiotv.com. My name is Rob McConnell, and I am a Canadian. And you've got to start wondering about politicians who, go around saying that the president of another country, our best friends, our neighbors to the south, could have started an intergalactic war. Or what did he say exactly? Let me read this again. In November 2005, Hellyer accused U.S. President George W. Bush of plotting an intergalactic war. Yeah, I'll be back on the other side of this break. Don't go away.